Are you ready to say goodbye to the constant ups and downs of the artist income roller coaster? Whether you're a full-time artist who wants to increase and stabilize your income, a part-time musician who wants to go full-time, or a hobbyist who needs to fund your passion projects, this podcast will equip you with the tools, resources, and inspiration to make it happen. My name is Bree Noble. I'm a musician, best-selling author, and educator whose mission is to help musicians like you to increase the income you're already making and tap into new income streams so you can create a more diverse, stable, reliable income from music and finally ditch the starving artist mentality. Now let's dive into the Profitable Musician Show. Hello, everyone. This is Bree Noble, and welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to be here with Ian Shepherd from Mastering Advice. We are going to talk about mastering today, obviously, and I'm so excited to have an expert here because this is definitely not my area of expertise. And I don't think I've even had anyone on the show really talking about this piece of the production puzzle. So I'm excited to talk about that. I always start off with just finding out about your background, your musical background, how you got from here to there, that kind of thing, Ian. So if you could let them know, that would be really awesome.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, I started out, I played trombone as a kid. In fact, there's a trombone somewhere behind me in the background there, which I don't practice anymore and kind of wish I did. So I was classically trained, and then, was in orchestras and that kind of stuff. Didn't want to do physics and at university, so I ended up doing physics and music, which was actually really unusual back then. These days there's loads of music technology courses and stuff, but back then there were only 2 or 3 courses that you could do. Kind of got halfway through that and was like depressed because, well, I'm not good enough to be a professional musician. I don't want to be a music teacher. So what am I going to do? And then, I could be a sound engineer. And I got really lucky because most people get into mastering kind of on the back of either being a musician or a producer or a recording engineer or some kind of later on in their career. But I just sent out a load of letters to studios here in the UK, including to this company, SRT. They were a mastering company, but I didn't know that. I didn't realize. And so I ended up kind of getting a job there pretty much straight after college, which, as I say, kind of really young. And, also, I was really lucky that I had mentors. It's really hard these days to get people to help you get a career in the music industry, but having kind of got my foot in the door, they trained me up. And yeah, I did that I worked for them for 15 years as a professional mastering engineer. We can talk a bit more about what mastering actually is, but I did some recording and some production as well. And then I got there were enhanced CDs back in the day. We're putting videos on the end of a CD so that you could have the music and the video. And from there we moved into DVD, and from there I moved into Blu-ray, and that's when I moved to set up my own company. About the same time I started blogging and started a YouTube channel. Since then I've started my own podcast and developed some audio plugins to help people get better results at doing this stuff. So I've kind of got all kinds of different areas of the production process now that I'm kind of involved with. So yeah, I feel really lucky.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so cool that you found someone to really train you up in this stuff and you're using kind of that science knowledge and the music together. I know back in the day, like I was music and business, and that was kind of weird too. Now it's a lot more normal, which is great because musicians need that information. So let's get into mastering. Like, let's just kind of start at the ground level here, because there may be some people here that don't really know what mastering is, or there may be people who think they know what mastering is, but maybe they need a little more nuanced definition.
Right. So I kind of have 3 different explanations. There's the super short one, there's the dry technical one, and then there's the long, more interesting one. So the super short one is that it's just making the music sound the best that it can be. So mastering tends to be the stage after you've recorded and mixed all the songs of an album or an EP or a project, whatever it might be. And it's that final, it used to be making a production master to go to have vinyl pressed or for cassettes or CDs. And these days it's much more about kind of releasing it for the online streaming services. So it's kind of taking a step back and looking at the whole collection of songs. So, I always say when you're mixing a song, you're balancing the channels in the mix to create a final song. Mastering is kind of like balancing the songs in an album or a group or a playlist or a group of songs to create something, a convincing whole. The kind of the dry technical one is just literally that. You've got to create something that is suitable for whatever format it's going to be replicated on. So these days, that's about the right file formats, the right loudness, all those kind of different specifications are needed for online, for delivering it, distributing it. And then the kind of the more interesting one is that answer is to say that it's I always think of it as a bit like Photoshop for audio. So these days everybody has a camera on their phone, and every so often you take a picture that you're really proud of, and you think, oh, I'm gonna, I don't know, print that out and put it on the wall, or send it to, maybe use it as a card for somebody's birthday or whatever. And then you look at it and you go, oh wait, but there's there's a blob of food on my face, or there's a power line in the background of my landscape. So you might open it up in Photoshop and you might try and fix those problems. You might rebalance the colors, the brightness. You might change the aspect ratio, the crop of it to kind of zoom in on somebody's face, all those kind of things. And mastering is the same thing for music, except that instead of contrast and brightness, we're balancing loudness and dynamics. So how lively it sounds, how impactful it is, whether it's got the right punch and impact. Instead of color balance, you're dealing with the overall sound of it, the amount of bass, treble, mids, highs that might be in there, so that it's going to translate, so it's going to sound good on as many different systems as possible, right from an earbud or a phone speaker up to, a club PA or whatever it might be. Yeah, so and you could even take it a little bit further and say that it's almost like presenting an exhibition of photographs or pictures, right? So at that point, you're thinking about, well, what order are they going to be in when people walk around, and how big am I going to print them, and how am I going to light them, and am I going to have 2 or 3 on this wall? And the same thing applies with mastering. It's about what's the running order going to be, what are the gaps going to be, how does this song relate to that song so that they balance well, and this one sounds big and loud and this one sounds soft and intimate, all of those kind of decisions. Yeah, that's my usual way of explaining it.
No, I love that description, and that makes a lot of sense, but that kind of brings up the question that I'm sure you get all the time nowadays, when people aren't necessarily releasing full albums at the same time. Should they be mastering singles? Like, does that make sense when it's not in comparison with other things? Or maybe they're releasing singles as they go, and it is eventually going to be in with, an album with other things, but you don't have all those pieces yet. So I think this landscape makes it a little bit different. And so I was kind of wondering, like, then are you balancing against like some kind of standard on Spotify of songs that they might be next to on a playlist or something?
Yeah, a great question. And so I prefer to master an album, or at least 2 or 3 songs, because that's when it starts to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, I don't usually, I usually like to come to a project cold. I like to just kind of listen and try and have empathy for what the artist or the producer is trying to achieve, and just bring a fresh perspective to it. So I will do that first and then start comparing to other things. If somebody tells me this is going to be the first one and there's going to be an album to follow, then I always say to them, okay, so I will do what I think is right for this song right now. When we've heard the other songs that are in the project, maybe there might be some little tweaks that are needed. And sometimes there are, but they're usually quite minor. Because I have an idea in my head. Actually, that's not strictly true. I don't always have an idea in my head of how I want things to sound, but I always have an idea of what I don't want things to sound like. So as soon as I start hearing something, it's like, oh, okay, I want to improve it this way, or I want to help that, or that's not quite working, but if we do this, it'll get better. And usually when I've finished up with that, then is when I might go to, I mean, sometimes people come to me with reference tracks, so they say that I want to sound like Taylor Swift or Metallica or whoever it is. And then you can say, okay, well, so based on what I know about those artists, that tells me this about how they want this to turn out. And we can kind of have a conversation about that. I will still not usually listen to those things first. I usually come to it fresh, and then I'll go back to the reference and kind of think, okay, well, based on that idea, maybe I need to move it in this direction. I mean, the other thing that I like to think about, especially these days, is thinking about how it might sit against things in a playlist, because lots of people are hoping that their music will get picked up and featured in, top 10 country artists or whatever it might be. And so I will then check my work against other similar stuff. And there's a kind of interesting tangent that we don't have to get into too much, which is how loud the songs should be and what happens when things get played back online. Because what lots of people don't realize, there's a big thing in the music industry is this thing called the loudness wars, and this idea that you need to have your music be super loud in order to be successful or popular. And I understand that, and I know people feel a lot of pressure about that. But the reality is, most people listening on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or wherever it is, all of those platforms by default will, if a song is super loud, they just turn it back down. Because people don't like being at sudden changes in loudness. So many people complaining about the ads on YouTube, and it's always that they just suddenly jump in way too loud. So to try and improve that, they do this thing where they measure how loud things are and they turn the loud stuff down. And that completely changes the way that things feel when we hear them. You might have mastered it so you thought you were just as loud as Taylor Swift, and then when you hear it with the two loudness matched, it feels completely different. So that's a really important part of the process for me, is how does it sound on its own? How does it sound in comparison to other things I imagine it might be next to? And then how will it sound when people hear it in that way, with the loud stuff evened out? So yeah, those are all the kind of things I think about. And so kind of to get back to your question, if it's going to be part of an album, it can kind of evolve over time. If it's just a single song, it is harder, but even when you need to make changes, usually for me, it's a 5 or 10% thing, and it's not like a dramatic kind of shift in the way that something sounds. It's just like, oh, now that I hear that it's going to come after this song, I'm going to have the introduction come a little bit quieter, or, okay, so that one was super loud, so we're going to do this instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think that, the best way to go about it, I would say, and this is the way I always encourage artists to create anyway, is to create your whole, like, I recommend EPs a lot. Create your whole EP, be 4 to 6 songs, have those all done, get them mastered, and then start releasing them as singles, right? So you're not, you've got it all mastered together as one project, but they can still be released over time, and you can take advantage of all that promotional opportunity. So, I mean, would that be kind of, in your opinion, a good way to do it, is like you have that group of songs and then they're all mastered together, and then it's like a cohesive thing. When it gets to eventually being that cohesive thing, it will sound that way.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the ideal. But I appreciate people. I mean, the reality is it can take so long to write and produce a song and get it to the point where you're happy to let it go. I totally understand when people kind of feel impatient and just want to get it out there. So yeah, either of those will work. Certainly, I've seen more and more mainstream artists kind of releasing things in the way that you just described. So just for example, I'm a big Peter Gabriel fan, and he actually released one song a month for his last album over the course of more than a year, and was actually touring, performing the songs from the album before even the album was, and then the album kind of came out as a whole. And I saved it up. I didn't listen. I listened to the first song, and then I was like, no, I'm going to wait for the album. So I put it off for an entire year so that I could, because I still, I come from that. I used to love going out and buying a record or buying a CD and listening through to it as an experience. But yeah, so all of these things can work and can get great results.
And I think that's coming back to, I think with vinyl, like so many Gen Zers especially are really into vinyl. And so I think that may come back, and mastering may even have a huge surge of like mastering a whole album because of vinyl.
Could well be. Yeah. I mean, it's still a fairly small slice of the overall pie, but it and I mean, I don't know how true this is. I hear lots of people buy vinyl and never play it. They just like the artwork and
Right.
which I do as well. But I mean, I think mastering is still super important. Everybody is definitely, in fact, in some ways, I almost feel like there's too much emphasis put on it. One of the I think an important thing for people to understand about mastering is it's an opportunity, like I say, to make the music sound as good as it possibly can. But you need to be at a decent standard going into it. And I think it used to be a thing that nobody knew about when I started out, and now it's almost like everybody knows about it, and they're almost like, I want to do the they want to focus on the mastering instead of the recording and the production. You know, I mean,
Oh,
the best way to make mixing easy is to do a fantastic recording, and the best way to make mastering easy is to do a fantastic mix of a fantastic recording and a fantastic performance as well. You know, so kind of keeping everything to the highest possible level all the way through is always going to get the best possible result.
yeah, I've definitely heard that, especially from mixing engineers. It's like you can't fix things in the mix if the recording is not getting the best quality. You can only do so much, right? So it's like building upon each other. And so we really need to think about all levels of what's going on. You know, is there is there anything you can do with mastering if the mix is kind of bad? Or do you just go, you know what, you need to go back and remix this?
I'm always cautious about calling anyone's mix bad. You
Well,
know,
no,
there's,
you don't have to say that, but you're like, you know, it would really benefit from like a new mix.
I mean, I'll give you I mean, the funny thing is that new technology is coming out all the time, right? So, like back in the day, if let's say the lead vocals weren't quite loud enough, you have a vocalist who's a little bit shy, and you know, oh, don't make it be that loud, and actually, it needs to be up there. That was something you could kind of sort of bring the vocal out a little bit in the mastering stage, and that would help.
Mm.
But it would always be better for them to go back to the mix and tweak it. These days, there's tech that will enable you to actually, within reason, lift the vocal out or pull the drums back or boost the guitars from a stereo mix, which is kind of science fiction to me, you know, from like even 5 years ago. So like those are no longer necessarily deal breakers. You'd always get a better result if you go back to the mix, and that's always what I'd encourage people to do. But just to give an example of something that can sometimes happen, if sometimes people want a wide piano sound, and they can hit the phase invert or the polarity invert button on the mixer. It's like a circle with a line through it, and it's a technical thing, and it'll take something that's kind of fairly mono sounding and really spread it out. And initially it kind of seems exciting and like really cool until you hit the mono button or you play it back on a phone speaker where there's only one speaker. Because what happens is one of those has been flipped upside down. Basically, the waveform's been flipped upside down, and when they get recombined, they cancel out. So you can have this thing where there's like I've had albums with a bass where you hit mono and the bass part just literally disappears, or the piano more or less disappears, you know, because it was pretty much in the center, and then it. So those kind of things, there's nothing you can do. You have to go back and fix that in the mix, or you have to live with it, you know, which sometimes because of deadlines happens. A lot of other stuff you really can help with. And I mean, it's kind of on the one hand, I'm saying, you know, you want your mix to be as good as it possibly can be. On the other hand, it's kind of amazing what you can achieve in the mastering. And it's one of the reasons I kind of find it enjoyable and fascinating is the power.
Yes.
But you know, a few things, like one thing is if you've got some kind of real imbalance. So sometimes I'll get a mix where I'm like, oh, I love this vocal, but I really want to open out the high frequencies and give it more sweetness and air and space, but the drum sound is really bright. So you try and do that for the vocal, and the drums just get really uncomfortable and, you know, too much. Or the opposite applies, where you want to brighten up the drums and the vocal is already quite bright, so you brighten up the drums and the vocal is suddenly kind of making your ears bleed. That kind of thing. There's not a heck of a lot that you can do in the mastering that's going to need a mix tweak. And I mean, it's interesting because there are some mastering engineers who the first thing they do is say to their client, no, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, go back and do it again. And their clients love them, apparently. That's not me. I don't get those clients, and I don't tend to do that. I will always try and kind of have respect and empathy for what's given to me. So even if I think it sounds a little bit unusual, I will still do what I think is the best for it and say, you know, here you go, here's my master. I can't help being curious that maybe if we, you know, backed off that compressor a little bit, or if we opened out the guitar sound slightly, maybe I could get an even better result. And if you'd like to try that experiment, I would really like to do that. And in that case, you know, sometimes they will come back and say, yeah, absolutely, let's go for it. And other times they're like, no, I'm sick of this. I've been working on it for 2 years. I just want to get rid of it. Or, you know, we can't afford to go back into the studio or whatever it is. And then, you know, that's fine as well. So yes, there's lots of things you can do, but only up to a point. You know, you can't get something exceptional if it's not great already. And you can't something to sound great unless it's good already. So yeah, there are always limitations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's cool to know that there are some things you can do. I know I've been in a band before where the mixing was like the production mixing was done or overseen by all the instrumentalists. And so they would always like, I felt like they always overblew the instruments over the vocals and you couldn't hear them. And it sounds like that is something you could actually fix in the mastering phase. And you could probably do it without them even, realizing that you did it, but making it more balanced.
It's some with modern technology, it's definitely something you can improve. There are limits because all of this stuff it's the same kind of science that goes into making MP3 files. And if
Mm.
you've ever heard a kind of a low quality MP3 file, you can get this kind of swirly metallic kind of sound to it that is not very pleasant. And if you go too far with trying to, for example, lift a vocal out, you can get side effects that are similar. So yeah, it's if the vocal's way too low, then you're probably going to have to go back and do it again. But yeah, in terms of little subtle tweaks, it is. And I mean, another example is if somebody has a live recording, where it was straight out of the sound desk, so there is no real mix. It's just what there is. And in that situation, for example, quite often the drums will not be in the PA that much because they're really loud on stage anyway. So in the recording, there may not be as much as you'd like. There are things you can do to help with that. There's all kinds of stuff that can be done. And new tech being kind of thought of every day now. You just think about the Beatles documentary, Get Back, where they went back and because the reason a lot of that footage didn't get used in the original film of Let It Be was just that the instruments were obscuring the voices. And with this modern technology, Peter Jackson and the guys there were able to separate these things out and kind of rebalance them to make it more usable. So it's amazing what is possible these days.
Super cool. So I want to ask you about like the visual part of mastering. And the reason I'm asking this is because I record a music podcast. So I see the waveforms all the time. And I can absolutely tell when a song hasn't been mastered because it doesn't have like that, big chunk there. Like the drums are just like all delineated and like, the levels are clearly like all over the place. Is part of what you do like visual, or is it all audio, but then when you look at the visual, you're like, yep, it looks mastered?
It's a kind of a bit of both. I mean, one thing I would say is we need to be really careful with the waveforms. I know exactly what you mean. Kind of unmastered stuff is all kind of spiky and lots and lots of variety. Once it gets mastered, it looks much more. I mean, if it's gone too far, it looks more like a sausage or a brick. And that's the.
No, the brick is terrible. Sometimes those are even like have distortion.
That can be the case. Yeah. In fact, I did a video for my YouTube channel that people might want to kind of check out on this just kind of recently, because I think you need to be careful looking at waveforms. You can tell a certain amount, and then when you start getting towards that point where everything is much more dense, it gets less useful. You can actually have something that's much louder and they look pretty much similar. Having said that, there's other stuff that you can look at. So one of the plugins that I developed is a thing called Dynameter, which gives you an idea of how much compression and limiting, the technical terms, have been used on the song. And that gives you much more useful feedback than looking at a waveform to get this stuff right. So, I mean, to rewind slightly, I never master or mix with my eyes. It's all about how it sounds. And if the waveform looks scary or it doesn't look kind of solid enough, or if Dynameter is showing me something but it sounds good, I'm always going to go with what my ears tell me rather than what I see. Having said that, when you're starting out, all of these visual aids can be super helpful. I'm sure people have kind of seen the frequency response curve where it gives you an idea of how much bass, mid, and treble there is, for example. And we have loudness meters these days. Back in the day, I used a VU meter, which had a kind of a needle. And in fact, I'm kind of old school, so I still use a plug-in version of that these days. But well, yeah, all of this visual stuff can be, there's ways of visualizing how much stereo spread there is in a signal. It can all be really, really helpful, especially when we're trying to figure out what should something sound like, and what should I be doing with this, and what is the effect of changing, just kind of helping give you some kind of perspective on it. But the final decision, I think, should always be based on the way that it sounds rather than the numbers or the visuals.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So there's so many tools, and you were talking about even tools that you develop nowadays to be able to do this yourself. And I know in my experience, I even learned how to mix my own stuff, but I always sent it off for mastering because I did not feel confident. What is your opinion, and being, of course, a master engineer yourself, like, what is your opinion around sending off your stuff to be mastered by a professional versus trying to do it yourself?
So I'm a mastering engineer, so I think to get the absolute best results, you should definitely use a professional mastering engineer. And I think there's a lot of advantages to doing that, especially if you've recorded a mix yourself. I mean, one, kind of suggestion that people seem to find kind of helpful is just that, the mastering engineer could be the only person outside of you who gets to hear it, who gets to give you an opinion. And the whole thing about mastering is that rather than working for months and weeks on songs, typically you'll master an album in a day, maybe a day and a half. So it's much more a kind of, you're hearing the first impressions and trying to optimize for that. Also, because a mastering engineer will have mastered a lot of albums over the course of their career, they will hopefully have a lot of experience to come to that. And if they're successful, then hopefully they have good taste. So their opinions are going to be helpful to you. So that's definitely there's a huge number of benefits to using. Having said that, I think I appreciate it also. I mean, mastering is fun, right? It's another part of the creative process, and there's lots of people who don't want to go to somebody else. They want to learn how to do this stuff themselves. So yeah, on the podcast and on the website, the YouTube channel, I have all kinds of stuff to help people get better results doing this themselves. I mean, I mentioned that I was lucky enough to have mentors back in the day, and that's so much harder to come across these days. The reason I started my blog originally was I saw so much bad advice online, in my opinion, that I wanted to help people do things more the way that I was taught, that I knew from experience was going to help get them great results. So you can absolutely master music yourself. I have one thing I like to say is that mastering is simple, but it's not easy. So one of the things that I see a lot from YouTube and everywhere else is people getting way into the weeds with all of, at the end of the day, mastering for me is about deciding how loud it's going to be, balancing the EQ, and then thinking about the dynamics, which is the contrast between the verse and the chorus, how hard the drums hit, that kind of stuff. If you get those three things right, I mean, even if you get the EQ and the loudness right and don't go any further than that, you can get 80% to 90% of the value from the process, which is not to say that the final 10% isn't also super worthwhile. But to do that is not easy. You need to have a good listening environment that you can trust. Having a lot of experience helps. It's hard to get perspective on our own music when we've been working on it for so long. It's easy to tell yourself stories about, oh, well, it's fine that the drums sound a bit dull because of this, and this. That's how it, whereas a mastering engineer might come to it and say, well, I don't care about all of that. You need to do this. And that's kind of helpful input. So yeah, both things are valid. And I mean, it's really interesting because I get a kind of mix of people doing my courses. There's people who do the course and actually go on to become professional mastering engineers. There's people who come on and do the course and say, yeah, I don't want to do that, but still feel that it's valuable because they understand much more about what is and isn't possible and how to get where they need to go to get a good result. So, and there's people who take the ideas and go back and use those on the recording, the production stuff that they're doing. And then there's kind of professional mastering engineers who just come along to see what I'm doing.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Like I always say, like if you're going to hire someone to do something, you should really know the process so you know if they're doing it right. And whenever you're paying someone for something, it's really good to know, at least understand what they're doing. So, you're not going to be screwed or, get not a good result. You mentioned the listening environment. I wanted to ask, do you recommend listening with headphones, in speakers, both? How do you get the right, feel for what you're going to hear in general?
I mean, that's one of the hardest things, I think. And I mean, as well, I mentioned about perspective. Another thing that's hard is that even if you've set up the best possible kind of recording and production room at home that you can, another value of going to a mastering engineer is that they will have a very, very fine-tuned, accurate monitoring system to listen to things on that will give them a very pragmatic view of how things sound. And so, the mastering to some extent is a kind of a reassessment. It's like, okay, so we did all of that. Did it work? And what do we need to change to improve it even further? If you're listening to it on exactly the same system that you made all those previous decisions on, you're going to think it sounds fine already, right? Because any problems that, let's say you have a room where you're not hearing quite enough bass and you've ended up putting more low end than was necessary into the mix, you're still not going to hear quite as much low end as there really, so you're not going to realize that. So one thing I suggest to people who do the course is that you could just take stuff out and listen to it on another playback system that you know really well, which could be earbuds, it could be a smart speaker, it could be in the car, it could be a hi-fi, whatever it is, and just make notes and kind of go, oh, is this song a bit bright, or is that one a bit loud, or what? And then go back into the studio and think about it again. But another great option is to get a really good pair of headphones. In fact, I'm just editing a video for the YouTube channel about Audeze headphones that lots of people are talking about, especially in mastering these days. They're super expensive, but they're also very, very good. And people are kind of asking me which ones they can use. So that can be really helpful. And one benefit of headphones is that you don't have to worry about the room, because they're speakers that sit on your head. Whereas if however good your speakers are, if the room doesn't have acoustic treatment, I mean, you can see some panels up behind me at the other end of the room. I spent a lot of time kind of tuning this so that the speakers can sound as good as they can in the room. Until I added this treatment, this room didn't sound right at all. And so it can be a real challenge to get a speaker system that works really well for you. I prefer working on speakers myself, but there are top-end mastering engineers these days who work solely on headphones. So yeah, they're both great options. And I think if you want to get a different perspective, then a high-quality pair of headphones is a good option.
Awesome. So I see a lot of people, especially people that send me music, that have used like AI type of tools for mastering, Lander and the like. And the only reason I know that is because they forget to change the name and it says like blah, 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 Lander, So I see this and I'm like, very interesting to see how many people are using these. What are your opinions on these? If you think there are good ones, like what are the top ones?
They're great. Because they're super quick, they're super affordable, especially in comparison to going to Pro Engineer, and they can get decent results. To go back to the Photoshop analogy though, I mean, I have a bit of a problem with them because they say, oh, get professional mastering for your music. And that annoys me because that's not what mastering is, right? Mastering is a conversation with a person who understands the emotion and the lyrics and the intent of your music and what you're trying to do, and has empathy for it, and can talk to you about and say, hey, did you mean for this to, that the tambourine is really loud in that section? Is that, there's no AI systems that can do that right now. So it's more like that kind of the magic wand tool that you click in, well, these days on your phone, right? You've got a picture and it looks okay, and you click the magic wand and it's, oh, that looks better. Okay. Is it the best it can possibly be? Probably not. It's probably better. And sometimes, like I had one that was taken in a studio somewhere where the light was really, I pressed the magic wand button and everything went green. It was like completely wrong. I'm going to do a video where I demonstrate that because it was so hilarious. And the same thing can happen with the automated mastering. I think another thing to say is I did a talk at a college here in the UK, where they were asking exactly this question. So we had the same thing mastered by me and 2 or 3 of these other mastering services. And lots of them kind of sounded okay if you listen to individual songs. It's like they sounded different to my master, but not necessarily drastically better or worse, just kind of different. Except that this was an album, and when you played from song 1 into song 2, song 1 was meant to be loud and song 2 was meant to be quiet. And all of the automated ones made song 1 loud and song 2 loud. So the song that was meant to be quiet and gentle was right up there. So when you listen to them, it just made no sense, right? It just sounded wrong. And that as well is something that the AI currently just doesn't have a grip on. They will probably improve it. It will probably come. And I think the other thing is that people are using it in really creative ways. So there's people who will send it off to Lander or wherever. It comes back and they go, oh yeah, I'm not quite happy. And they'll tweak what they sent and send it again. And they might do it 4 or 5 times until they get a result that they're happy with. But then you come back to what we were talking about just before, which is it's still you listening on your system with you don't have that none of the automated systems are at the point where they can give you an opinion like a person can. So I think I would absolutely encourage people to go out and experiment with them. And if you get results that you like, and then you take them out and you play them everywhere and it sounds fantastic and everybody, kind of loves it, then great. But just kind of be cautious, be aware of the limitations. And yeah, like I say, I think, music is about people, right? It's about communicating emotion. And the machines don't get that yet. I'm not 100% sure they ever will.
I kind of hope they don't.
I kind of hope they don't, because that might be slightly scary.
Yes.
But yeah, so for me, it's like, if you've spent months writing these songs, crafting these songs, and then months recording them and mixing, you got the best possible result you can, and then you just kind of go, well, auto. Okay, that's fine. That kind of doesn't make sense to me. It's like, why scrimp on that final step? When don't you want somebody to go, there, how about that? And you're like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. So
I agree. It's
I'm
kind of
biased,
like
obviously, but
putting a really expensive, Christmas present that you put a lot of thought into and you spent a lot of money on it, and then you put it in a paper bag, and give it to somebody. Like,
that's great. I might steal that if that's okay. That's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why I thought of that, but it's so true. It's like you took it all the way to the end with all the most care and the expense, and then you just like, put it in a paper bag.
Yep, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. This has been so great. I think you've really clarified to people what mastering is, why we need to care about it, how it's different from mixing, which I think is one big question that people have, and how it's not just about loudness. This has all been so helpful. We're going to provide some resources from you to help people go even further. I just want to mention, first of all, you have a podcast called The Mastering Show, which is such a great name. And then also we're going to provide some resources at profitablemusician.com/mastering that you guys can check out from Ian to go even further into these subjects. How else can they connect with you online?
You can just search for me. I'm on Facebook. I'm a little bit on Instagram, not so much. I used to be on Twitter, but not so much these days. Yeah, if you search for Ian Shepherd Mastering, you'll find something. It'd be great if people want to come along and say hello.
And you've got a YouTube channel as well, right?
Yep, there's a YouTube channel, Production Advice, and the website is, well, you're going to give links to all of that. So
yes, yeah. So profitablemusician.com/mastering. You guys can find all of that stuff. Thank you so much, Ian. And it's so great to get your perspective on this. And, I always try to tie this into profitability, of course, because that's what this show is about. But like I said, with the whole paper bag thing, like if you have worked so hard and put so much money into an album, and then you don't take it to the final step in the most professional way that you can, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not going to be as profitable, because that music is not going to land as well, and that's going to be a cascade effect. So that's how I pull this into profitability, and also just knowing, how you should spend your money, the money that you have. Should you spend it on a professional engineer? Should you spend it on learning how to master yourself? There's different directions you can go. And so you guys can use some of Ian's resources to figure that out for yourself. But any last parting words you want to say about mastering?
I don't think so. I mean, I loved what you were saying there at the end about, I think you're right. You can do mastering yourself, but you're going to have to invest a lot of time to get good and get a result that you're happy with. And that might be something that's fun and that you enjoy. And in that case, that's fantastic. But maybe it's better to invest a bit of money in getting somebody who, does it day in, day out, to just kind of help you and know that that's the best result. There's a few times in my career where people have actually said to me that when they heard the mastered version, it made them cry in a good way. And it's, that to me is when it's a real success. That's the goal, is to really help the music connect directly with the listener, the fan. And I think, it's just such an important part of the process. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's dramatic, but it's really good fun. It's really satisfying to do. So
I love that perspective. All this technical talk, it's really all about generating the emotion that we want to generate from the music that we've created, right?
Exactly. When people connect with emotion, that's when they connect with you as a performer, and that's when they're going to want to buy more of your music, come to the gigs, buy the merchandise, all that stuff. And that's when, like you say, it can be, it's profitable, maybe not even just in a monetary sense, but just in a kind of, communication sense and a connection and all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all of your time and sharing your expertise with us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for asking me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Profitable Musician Show. I would love to know your takeaways and aha moments from this episode. Leave me a comment over at profitablemusician.com so I can bring you more of the information, interviews, and resources that you love. Thanks to Rondi Fay, one of my Academy members, for providing the music for our podcast. You can check her out at rondifay.com. That's RANDIFAY.com. Just remember, knowledge is power, but without implementation, it is useless. And inspiration without action is merely entertainment. But I know you're not just a dreamer, you are a doer. And I promise I'll be here every week to support you and remind you that you can be a profitable musician.